Hello, and thank you for tuning in. I'm here in Athleague in County Roscommon. In fact, it's not that terribly far from Strokestown, where I covered the eviction before Christmas. And there is a protest going on here at the meat factory, and Deputy Michael Fitzmaurice is going to chat to me now about what has been happening in the last week. So, Michael, thanks very much for talking to me.
No problem.
Michael, you've been here on and off for most of the last week. What's been happening?
Well, first of all, the Beef Plan movement are obviously advertised over a week ago that they're having peaceful protests outside the meat factory for the simple reason farmers are at their wits' end to survive, as we know from the stats in line of beef and cattle prices in general, and they are doing a peaceful protest, I think, from my understanding, and I'm open to correction, 18 or 19 plants around the country, to highlight the need for farmers to stick together and to try and get, and in my opinion, the likes of MII, Meat Ireland, needs to show a bit of leadership in this, because at the end of the day, if they don't, at the number of farmers that we are losing in this country, we will end up that you won't have factories in some places, you won't have people in jobs in some places, and we'll be importing, like we are hearing stories at the moment, of lorry loads of beef being imported into a country that exports 90% of what it produces itself. So that doesn't make much sense. What's going on is, in my opinion at the moment, is disgraceful with the factories around the country, and indeed the retailers, because when the housewife or a person goes shopping in any of the main stores, they pay a fairly high price for their meat. But I can tell you that out of every tenner, and it's written over there on a board, that the person spends at the shop, €5 goes to the retailer, €2.90 to the factory, and €2.10 to the farmer that brings it from birth to get it ready to slaughter. And that doesn't add up in any world.
So you're talking 2.5 years work.
Well, you're talking about, it depends on some 30 months. There's a problem with that as well.
Yes.
You'd wonder what's the difference between 29 months and 28 or 9 days and 30 months and 10 days. There's a lot of rules and regulations being imposed by, be it retailers and the factories, that is actually complicating it more for the farmer. But unfortunately, right around this country at the moment, farmers are at their wits' end, and that's why you see such a crowd here this evening in a peaceful protest. And they are not alone here. I know that in Ballyhon, as I call to them as a public representative, I will stand behind the farmers, and I call to them nearly every day for a short while to show my support to them.
Well, now, Michael, there's a sense of déjà vu about all of this, and I'm a former history teacher, and the one thing that we learn from history is that we learn nothing from history, because if we go back to 2000, January 2000, in actual fact, we had the exact same thing: beef prices on the floor, farmers going out of business, and they were protesting all over the country. At that time, Mary Harney commissioned Professor Sheehy from University College in Cork, the economics professor, to carry out an investigation as to whether or not a cartel operated in the beef industry in Ireland. Now, he was actually on record from the previous week as saying that cartel didn't exist, but nevertheless she went ahead and she appointed him to carry out the investigation. He presented his report later on in September of that year, and the conclusion was that no cartel existed in the beef industry in Ireland. The protests ended. The lot for beef farmers didn't improve. In actual fact, it got worse, and it's now at the stage where there's a whole host of other issues now at play. Apart, it's not just the factories that we're dealing with. We're also dealing with the trade deals that we're going to see 100,000 tonnes of cheap beef come in from Brazil. The Amazon forest is being cleared at the rate of the size of 2 football pitches every second to produce beef to ship into Europe. You have 50,000 tonnes coming in under the Canadian trade deal. And now last Friday in fact, we saw President Trump welcome officials from the EU to the Oval Office to sign a deal that will see 400 million tonnes worth of beef coming from the States. So what do you think is going to, or where is all of this going to end up?
Well, there's no doubt about it that there's a lot of headwinds in the agricultural sector, but especially in the beef sector. As you have pointed out, you have Brexit at the moment.
Yes.
Now, and you have the Mercosur, as you've pointed out, which will be, my understanding is that the different parliaments are going to get a vote on it. Hopefully politicians will stand up for once and be counted on that they make sure that that's blocked. It was good to see the French agricultural minister stating that they weren't going to support it in its present form, whatever that means.
Mm-hmm.
Look, at a lot of things changes as well, so let's not get carried away in that. But the only thing about it is, let's deal with the fact of today. Factories keep telling the media, who seem to give them a fair bit of coverage, the media will, or the factories are saying that, there's a lot of beef there at the moment and it's hard to get rid of it and all that. Ironically enough, after 2 days of farmers pulling cattle last week, they were ringing around offering, from what we hear, it is alleged, fair bit higher prices, an awful lot higher prices. There was cattle moved from one end of the country to the other, and if it was that hard to sell beef, you'd wonder why you would be doing that. Second of all, the facts of it is today is on the tenner that I've outlined, or the €10, that's what the retailer gets, that's what the factory gets, and that's what the farmer gets. So there's room for manoeuvre from both of those that are getting most to make sure that a farmer is sustainable. And we need to make sure the people that are going in shopping in the big retail stores and right around this country, they need to start asking questions as well, because we have seen the fiascos that has gone on with Brazilian beef. We have seen the different scandals that has gone on. We know that there's, from what we hear, there is Polish beef being brought into this country. And do we want a quality product that's born, bred and reared in Ireland, or do we want to be getting something that hasn't the same traceability as what Irish beef has? And those are decisions that the consumer must make. But also, there's a reality in all of this, that farmers are very resilient, but I can see over the last 6 months that resilient, they are saying, look, if this doesn't improve, we won't be at it. So then, what happens then? What everybody must remember, that the farmer spends 95% of what they're getting in their local community. So that's, be it the local shopkeeper, that's the local merchant that sells the meal, that's the local school that they send their kids to, and it creates an economic area where farmers are working around. And if they are gone, well then obviously you won't have a vibrant town, which causes more knock-on problems, as we see in cities at the moment with the difficulty in housing. Not everyone can live within Dublin, to put it very bluntly. And if we have an abandoned rural Ireland, there's major problems with that.
Well, people that are living in Dublin and watching this thinks that this doesn't really have any impact or effect on you, but in actual fact it does, because the flight from the land results in more people crowding into the cities in search of work. And so you actually have a deserted countryside and an overcrowded city, and it does impact on all of us. Now, there are several other issues at play, and one of the other issues is these huge big feedlots. And I am reliably told that a former key member in the IFA in former years now has a massive feedlot in the south of the country that's feeding cattle into the factories this week. I've been told earlier today that while there was a 75% reduction in farmers bringing cattle to the factories in the last week, there was only a 25% reduction in throughput, of cattle slaughtered in the factories. So, that differential was made up by cattle coming in from the feedlots.
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't know about any particular case that you're talking about,
Yes.
but I can tell you that the factories themselves, it is widely known that they run large feedlots.
Yes.
And this isn't, 50 or 100 cattle, it is large numbers of cattle. But the problem is, at the end of the day, you won't have feedlots, you won't have farmers, and you won't have people working in the factories if this isn't addressed, because no matter how they try it in the line of the feedlot, they won't supply it all in this country. The second thing about it is, it appears to be a crazy decision by the likes of the EU and Phil Hogan to decide to do a trade deal by cutting down a football field or burning it every day in another part of the world and putting it into beef production to bring beef halfway across the world. No more than some other things that's being done at the moment in the name of climate change. And where you come, especially in the west of Ireland, if you look at the beef farmers and the suckler farmers, the land wouldn't be quite as good. The cattle would have a bigger range of acreage to roam around in, and it would be, in my opinion, a very good system where proper our cattle are brought up in a proper environment, a sustainable way.
Right. Well, I suppose really at the end of the day, the people of Ireland are now faced with a choice. Do we step up to the plate and save our farmers and so protect rural Ireland for future generations, or do we let our beef industry die and we have foreign beef supplying us and supplying the rest of Europe, and a whole way of life has died out in a very short time?
I think as a public representative, and I know that the Dáil is in recess at the moment, but it has to be looked into from what we are hearing, and this is alleged at the moment. What we are hearing is that there is beef nearly going round in circles, coming from Poland into this country, going out again to the likes of Italy. Don't know what's put on the box, to be honest about it, but I think that we need to make sure that we know on the traceability of all of this. Second of all, it is well known that in a lot of factories that kill lambs, that a massive amount of lambs are coming across the border, and also it is widely reported that lambs have come from Scotland into Northern Ireland and to the processing factories in south of the border. If this is happening, is Bord Bia promoting British lamb under Irish lamb going to other countries? If they're doing that, in my opinion, that's disgraceful.
And what can you do about that?
Well, first of all, we have to find out exactly what they're doing. We need to get the figures. That's our job to do. Second of all, in my opinion, we as politicians need to work together you have to have a price of production cost. Nobody can survive if you're taking less than the price of your production. And there has to be a realistic, I'm not talking about farmers making fortunes, I'm talking about realistic, and I believe that some type of legislation will have to be brought forward to do that, because it's either that or we end up, and it's not just I'm not talking about beef alone, I'm talking about be it vegetables or whatever, because we see at times stuff being sold in shops, and you'd look at it and you'd say, how could anybody produce that for that price? And it's the big major retailers as well that's putting the pressure on in the name of cheap food, which needs to be addressed as well.
So there is a cost for cheap food.
The cost for cheap food will be that down the road, if enough of people get out, the food will be very dear.
Okay, I suppose this whole issue of farming is very close to my heart. I grew up on a farm, and I have close family ties to farmers and farms and farming. and I am, I suppose, aware firsthand of the struggles that they're going through at the minute to survive. And this is not just about farmers. This is about how we want our country to progress in the future. Do we want to see the death of rural Ireland and massive cattle ranches like we have in America and in Canada? Or do we want to preserve the small family farm, which is at the heart of rural Ireland? It's the heartbeat of rural Ireland, keeping the local shops, post offices and businesses afloat, keeping local schools afloat. Do we want a situation where our young people can continue to stay on the land, or do we want them to take flight and move to the cities? These are the questions that we're going to have to ask ourselves. Thank you very much for watching, and I'd ask you please to subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'll put the details up later on this post, and please share, and thank you very much for watching.